Good morning.
Good morning.
Hello. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. My name's Anna Fournier, and for those of you who don't know me, I am the head of secondary in charge of academics.
Hi, and I'm Wendy Jones, and I'm director of sixth form.
So we're really pleased to be able to speak to you via this webinar this morning to let you have some help and some advice for your children after their trial exams and in preparation for their final examinations, which they'll take in May and June. Wendy and I both got lots that we want to share with you. So we're going to start with a presentation and it will sort of go a bit backwards and forwards between the two of us. And then afterwards, we would very much like to answer any questions that you have. So you should be able to put questions in the chat function. You can put them in during the presentation or afterwards. And then after we finish presenting, I'll moderate the questions and Wendy and I will be answering them. So without further ado, I am going to start this presentation. So during the trial examinations or the mock examinations, your children had a chance to practice answering examination questions in examination conditions. For some of the students, it wasn't exactly as it will be in May and June, but they did get a chance to experience the sort of stress that you go under when you are in an environment where the consequences of your actions have quite a big impact. And some students will have found that they actually thrive in that situation and that they almost enjoyed it. And other students probably really didn't enjoy it very much at all. But they had a go, they had a practice. And it was important for us to be able to give the students a chance to have a practice so that they know what their own emotional response was. And that's going to help them prepare for their final exams, which are different from the assessments that we run normally. Another aspect of the trials, which is really important now for the students to consider, is that they've been given some feedback about where they're at in their learning. Obviously we couldn't test them on the whole curriculum because that just isn't possible in the examinations, but they've got a very good indicator of what they are doing well at, what they know, what they understand, what they can do, and what they don't know and understand and can do. So post-trials, what we expect is for students to work on improving their performance. And how much they are able to improve actually very much depends on the student. So a student who worked really, really hard for the trials is already well on the way to maximising their potential. Someone who possibly didn't work so hard still has a lot of work to do, but there is time for this to happen. Students who achieved A's and A stars or high grades in their trials, they can't afford to do nothing between now and the examinations. Actually, in order to maintain that high level, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And students, as I said, who are not so proud possibly of the grades that they achieve, they do still have time to work on this. The students will be working with their teachers, and we will be doing everything from the school side to help our students maximise their performance. But the purpose of the webinar today was for Wendy and I to give you some ideas about how you as parents can really help support your children as they are preparing for these final examinations.
Okay. So thank you, Anna. So obviously this can be a stressful time for all, and I think it's important to make sure that your child, whether they've got an excellent result or whether they've got a disappointing result, maximises the weeks that they've got coming to make the best possible progress. And often students, as Anna said, who get good results go, oh, that's okay, I don't need to worry anymore, I can just relax. Well, obviously that's not the case. And if they want to maintain that grade, they have to continue working. So it's really important, whichever stage they're at, that they maximise the amount of progress that they can make over the next 14 weeks. I'm just going to say that again. There are approximately 14 weeks until the real exam starts. Sounds like a long way away, but it isn't. It'll go really quickly. So the most important message to get across to your child, and this will be a message that we as a school send to the students as well, is that every session that they do now counts. Every hour that they study, every 30 minutes that they study counts. Every week that they are doing more work counts. So if they haven't been doing anything, they need to start now. And another thing to emphasize to them is that even if they've got disappointed results, they can start now. And what they do between now and the 14 weeks will make a huge difference if they maximize their learning and work really, really hard. Equally, if they've done really well, then they need to maintain that so that they also continue to get those good results. So what are some of the reasons? I know sometimes as parents, you see a disappointing result and you go, oh, you just didn't work hard. And sometimes that is the case. And it could be that they haven't done so well because they messed up on the trial exam in some ways. And that is often the case. And that is why we do trials, so they make all the mistakes now and they find out their weaknesses, and then they won't make those mistakes and they'll fill in those gaps by the time they get to the real ones. So what are the common rookie errors? Well, quite often not finishing the paper in time can be a reason for disappointing results. So working on their timing and working out how much time they need for each question, reading the question paper carefully. You will be surprised at how many students go, oh, there was an extra page. I didn't see that. So that is a common error at this stage as well. Looking at the questions and again, not reading the instructions carefully enough and answering all the questions when in fact they may have only had to have chosen one question for a section. It's also a common result that can a common issue that can result in a poor trial result. Sometimes students are thrown by the structure or wording of a question. They haven't maybe looked at many past papers, or they've looked at very old past papers and then they've been thrown by a question. So that's something that can be worked on very easily. Maybe they didn't memorize the right information, or maybe they haven't utilized the right information in the correct way. Occasionally, they didn't bring their calculator. Sounds crazy, but it does happen. Or they realize in the actual exam that their calculator doesn't work. So making sure that they have all the right equipment and that it is all functioning well before the exam, and having that double check the day before the exam when something can be done about it is really key as well. So these are easily fixed problems, and each of those kind of things that I've spoken about can make a massive difference when they're fixed in raising the grades and the ultimate results for the students. So if they have got disappointing results, the first thing to do is to kind of do an audit with the students. And you can do that with them at home, and certainly the teachers will be doing it with their students, really analysing the paper and looking carefully at what they did well, but more importantly, what they didn't do well, and working on action plans for how they can improve on those areas. So who can they go to for help? Well, obviously, if they're in school, then we have a wealth of help at our hands. We've got the subject teachers, and the heads of department are obviously key in this. So they're the best people that you can get your child in touch with, who can look at the paper with the child and go, okay, you messed up on these areas, and let's make a plan on how we can improve on those areas. They can analyse the paper together. If you are working from home and are working online, this can still be done. Obviously, you won't know all the ins and outs of papers, but you can look at it with your child, look at the feedback they've had, and encourage them. All students will have feedback on their trials. So it's really important that you have that conversation with the parent and go with the child and go, so what did Miss say about this paper? What did she say that you did wrong? And what are you going to do about that? What's your action plan? So it's all about planning and thinking about what they need to do next as well. Okay, other people in school that we can contact, whether they are actually in school or whether they are at home with you, are obviously the counsellors. If your child seems stressed or you think there are underlying areas, and obviously you can encourage your child to get in touch with the counsellors, or you can get in touch with them on their behalf, as it were. The house parents are obviously a good source of information and a good contact point, particularly if your child is still at school. And if you have any issues at all, if you have any concerns about a subject teacher, or not subject teacher, but what's going on in that subject, then do get in touch with the house parent, and they'll be able to help you. House parents are also very good at working out who's in their house and who a student should be buddied with to study, so they can arrange study buddies, and that has even meant changing rooms sometimes, so that they're working with somebody who's, or sleeping with someone that's a little bit more studious, shall we say, and that often helps with students that are more relaxed in their attitude towards learning as well. So house parents and asking house parents for help is a really good port of call as well. We've also got learning support here, so they will be able to help if you feel that your if you feel that your parent, your child, has any underlying issues there, then you can get in touch with learning support, and we'll do our best to help in that situation as well. So there's lots that can be done. There'll be some mentoring sessions coming up on Monday that are going to go through this with the students themselves, and are going to give them some revision techniques and ideas on how they can move forward. So don't be afraid to get in touch with us, and do have those conversations if your child is at home, so that they know who to go and talk to, and just give them that little push. I'm going to pass on now to Anna.
Thanks, Wendy. I'm going to talk about learning now, because that's the key to it's everything we do here actually. But in order to prepare for the exams, Wendy's talked a little bit about exam technique, and that's something that teachers will focus on. But from the point of view of making sure that the time that the students have, that your children have between now and their final examinations, understanding how learning works and why it's really quite difficult will help you in your conversations with your children. So when we learn things, we make new connections in our brain, hence this graphic. And the more connections that we have in our brain, the more we've learned something. And when you try and learn something new, sometimes it's really easy and sometimes it's really hard. And how easy or hard it is totally depends on these connections. I'm quite sure around the dinner table with your students, with your children, sorry, Wendy and I keep saying this, with your children, they say, I just find history really hard. It's just really hard, but maths, no, that's fine. And it will be to do with how many connections they're able to make. So everything that we're going to be talking about is about trying to make sure that you're providing the best possible conditions for your child to make these connections. And there's various things that you can do to help. Now, the first thing that I'm going to talk to you about is, you may be familiar with this, it's all about retrieval practice. And I'm going to show you a graph to illustrate this. So on this graph, on the y-axis, the vertical axis, this is either showing how well you remember something or can do something or recall something. And so higher is better. And on the x-axis, it shows you time. Now, if you look at the very first line, the blue line, that shows you that if a student learned something in class, but they didn't really make great immediate connections into what they already know, at that point in time in the class, the likelihood of them remembering it is about 70%. And then if the student never actually goes back, they never review it in any way, they don't have a conversation about it, they don't read it, they don't go back to it, within one day, 24 hours later, the likelihood of them remembering it is about 20%. And when you get to a month later, we're down to about 5% likelihood of remembering it. Now, that's if there was no kind of retrieval. The retrieval means going back over whatever it was. The red line shows how the curve changes if the students review the learning straight after the class. Now, this could be as simple as 10 minutes after class, they're walking along the corridor with their friend and they have a chat about it. It could be that, or it could be independently. They get back to their house and they open up a textbook and read something, or they go on the internet. So as you can see, the red line is above the blue line. So that shows that 24 hours later, you've now got a 50% chance of remembering it. And 1 month later, you've got a 10% chance. So still not great, but a little bit better. Now, the yellow line shows what happens if the student also, there was some kind of retrieval that happened after 10 minutes after lesson, but also 24 hours later. So this is when, for example, they could be completing a prep assignment that tested them in some way of their understanding, but it made them think again about what happened in the class. And then 1 month later, they're now at 30% likelihood of remembering. And then if you look at the green and the turquoise lines, they show what happens if they review 1 week later and 1 month later. And as you can see, the likelihood of remembering goes up and up and up. Now, we structure the learning of our students because we know about this. But the reason I wanted to tell you about it is because it's a reminder that the students or your children have got a lot of ownership now over their time in their preparation for their examinations. And if they know this, and we have explained it to them, but if you know this and you can remind them, this is going to help them be more efficient in the time that they have. So we don't want them to spend 24 hours a day preparing for their exams. We really don't want that. But we do want them to be super efficient when they are preparing for those examinations. So I'm going to hand over to Wendy now, who is going to talk about how to make that revision time count.
Okay, thank you, Anna. So in a minute, I'm going to talk about timetabling your child's revision and helping them to make it effective. But in line with what Alex was saying, this is a quick, handy tip that the students will have on Monday in their pack that helps them to revise and hear very quickly. So this is about an hour, called a power hour. It's effective and quick. So the idea is rather than plowing through past papers and mindlessly answering, and sometimes we get students go, "Miss, I've done 10 past paper questions, woohoo!" And you're like, "Oh my goodness," because you know that they've made the same 10 mistakes in every single paper. And unfortunately, you get down to the market and repeat all the same mistakes. But it's better that they do one and practice this way rather than doing millions of papers, past papers, or worse, as sometimes they do. They think they're doing past papers, but what they're actually doing is just looking at the answers and writing it, thinking that that is a way that they can revise effectively. Unfortunately, it doesn't help the people. So the idea is that they choose a past paper, and I'm going to do something on history, for example. So they choose a question in history paper, and then they revise for 20 minutes intensively to answer that question. So all the subject knowledge that they need, they revise. If there's something that they feel that they don't know, they go and find that information, make notes on it. So they have a real intensive 20 minutes of revising for that particular question. Then they find out, they should know from the teacher how long they should spend on a particular question. And then they time themselves. So say they have 20 minutes for that question, they then write. With the timer, so they participate, they write their answer as though they were in the exam. Now, the next bit is the golden bit. Students also need to learn how examiners think. Okay, so past papers is useful, but only if they know how to mark it. So in classes, teachers will be looking now at peer marking, and they'll be going through marks in subjects like history, where it's being subjected to make sure students know how to go up grade boundaries and what a particular grade boundary looks like. So the student can then look at the past paper, look at the answers and the marking, and work out where they think they are in the mark. Then they also need to go and check with their teacher, "Hey teacher, I think I've given myself round about 15 out of 20 for this question, and these are my reasons why." And the teacher will go, "Yes, you're bang on." Or at the beginning, they'll say, "I think you've overestimated your mark here because you considered X, Y, Z." And actually, the mark is asking you to do A, B, and C. So there'll be certain specific things that they need to do to get to the next boundary. Now the student knows that, we know, next boundary, I need to be able to do A, B, and C. So that's in my mind. Then I remark it, next time I will know I need to do that. Okay, so that feedback and that marking is really, really important. And you can remind your kids at home, are you doing this? This tip, Miss Wendy, the teacher said is good. So this will really help. So that if you are seeing your children at home, or if you're talking to them if they're at school and they're saying, I'm doing loads of task makers, obviously we know that teenagers know everything and don't like to be given advice. So if you are in a situation where you're talking to your child and they're saying, I'm doing past papers, leave me alone, and you say, well, actually, I will use tapes. That might actually prompt them into thinking about how effective and active they're using their past papers. So talking about revision, as I said, we've got 14 weeks or so until the exams start, and every minute counts now, as it were. So what they do from now until the exam is really important. As you probably get from Anna's theory there, you will see that cramming does not work, right? And usually not only will they be tired when they get to the exam, and therefore their cognitive ability will be poorer, they won't remember what they're supposed to do anyway. So it's really important that they create, and you can help them to do this, a realistic study plan for the next few weeks. Okay, now this can be done monthly, or it can be done weekly and reviewed. It can be done on various apps that are out there, or it can be done old school on a piece of paper with lots of pretty patterns, depending on what your child likes. But there's lots of ways that they can do that. The teachers can help them to do that as well. But what's important about these revision plans and these revision timetables is that it is realistic. Okay, and what usually happens is a child will go, right, I'm going to wake up at 6 in the morning, and I'm going to study through, and I'm going to have like 10 minutes for lunch, and then I'm going to study through again, and I'm going to finish at midnight, and I'm going to do that all week. Now, obviously, that's unrealistic and, not achievable either. So you want the exam timetable and exam revision timetable to be realistic. So there should be breaks in there. And there should be also times when the child knows, or you as a family know, that they're not going to be studying. So if they're at home and Saturday night is a family night where you watch a video or whatever, then that needs to be scheduled in. If they're going to church or there are other things that are going on, that needs to be scheduled in. If you're doing things over Chinese New Year, that needs to be scheduled in so that the child manages that period very carefully and can see, and you can see, that they have got study periods during a holiday like Chinese New Year, but they've also got time when they're perhaps with family or celebrating and so on. And that will also help to minimize their stress levels. Because if they don't have this and they're also spending time with family or celebrating or whatever, then in the back of their head, that little voice will be going, I'm not studying, and they will start to get stressed. Okay? Or they'll go the other way and they'll be like, I can't possibly talk to Granny because I've got all this work to do. And actually you can sit them down and go, be realistic. You can have a break to talk to Granny. It's okay. All right. And you can have a nice meal because you've also earned it because you've done this. So building in free time and actually building it in as a reward is really important during this time as well, and should be consistent. So you can help by, maybe looking at these revision timetables with your child, and you can do that even if they're in school, if you're on the phone with them or whatever, to make sure that they are giving themselves decent breaks, that it is realistic, and that it is in a time frame that is manageable for them as well. Unfortunately, we can't go out a lot now, so I would normally suggest that they have a Saturday night when they go to the cinema. We can't do that. You get the idea. Give them some time in. And also really important for everybody, but particularly at this time, is that they are building in exercise during this time, so that will help with their, with endorphins, which makes them feel good, and it also helps with their cognitive ability. So even if that's just walking around the block, or if they can't leave their condo, then just walking around the condo for a bit. There's something that gets them out, or there's plenty of things on YouTube, or there's online at the school, or whatever it happens to be. They need to be doing something. Now, something about the timing. Students often think that if they sit there for 5 hours of stretch, that they can be really productive. They're not. concentration goes down really, really quickly. So optimum time is roughly between 20 and 30 minutes, and then have a little break. You could go up to 40 minutes and have a longer break of 10 minutes, but I would suggest 30 minutes, few minutes off is probably optimum, okay? And when you're doing that, when you're scheduling that, you and your child also need to think about what subjects are you actually going to be studying. So it's not effective to just go, it's Monday, I'm going to do all of biology, and Tuesday I'm going to do all of economics. Because by the time you get to next Monday, when it's biology day, you've forgotten everything that you studied that week. So it's important to intersperse the subjects around, and then you can go back and have that recall and that repeat that Anna was talking about, just to keep what you've been learning or what they've been learning fresh in their memories, and that's really important as well. Equally important is working out what topics that they are going to be learning. So just writing biology down is probably not as useful as writing down, I don't know, cells or whatever it is that they happen to be. I'm not a biologist. I'm just laughing at me because she is. So that they know exactly what topic they are going to be studying. And this comes into the planning as well, because at this time, it's a really good idea for students to write down the topics that they have to learn in their subjects. So each subject has a topic list. And then they can look at those topics and grade them. Now, we quite often say traffic lights is a good way, but they could do smiley faces and sad faces and red faces, depending. But a red topic would be, oh my goodness, I don't know that at all. Horrifies me. An orange topic would be, I know it a bit, but I still need to work in it. And green topic would be, yes, I've got this. I keep remembering it. And then obviously it's important to make sure the child is not just going, I'm going to focus on green stuff because that's easy. It's really important that the child looks at the red stuff first. Okay? And then you can first start with a bit of the green and the orange so that you're still keeping those fresh in your mind as well. And then that's really empowering as well. And builds confidence because the child can start ticking those off. And you can have a look at those traffic light lists with your child and go, okay, so I think you've left algebra off your revision, and that's one of your red subjects. So we need to tackle that monster before we get to the exam. So that's a good way of supporting your child there. So make sure they have rewards, make sure it's realistic, start with stuff, make sure there's good breaks in between, and don't cram. Okay, another important area that you can help your child with is to minimize distractions. Obviously, if they're in school, they've got their house parents and house staff that will be walking around during prep time and during the day to see what the students are doing, and they'll know, the kids that are easily distracted, and they're usually on board with helping those students to deal with those distractions. If they're at home, it's often very challenging with a teenager trying to prize their phone out of their hand and away from their desk. But this is really important, and there are apps out there that actually turn off all notifications and turn your phone off for a time period. I know this is a battle. I have two exam-aged children myself, so I'm talking from the heart here. But it is really important that the space that they have to study in is a space that is minimized from as many distractions as possible. So not next to the TV, for example, not next to an area where perhaps you may be working or talking or socializing. I would recommend, if you've got a quiet room that they can use to study in, that would be ideal. Ideally not their bedroom. Number one, you can't keep an eye on them. and number two, you want an area, you want to, where possible, separate the areas. So one area is their study area, and then their brain kind of gets used to, okay, this is my study area, and it kind of kicks into the cognitive working there. And this is my relax area, so that they know when they're in that area, they can do what they want, they can pick up their phone and so on. I know it's a battle with social media and phones and so on, but having those conversations with your child and negotiating, some parameters with phone use during study time is very important, I think, as well. Sometimes kids want to study with music, but actually the research shows that it's not very effective and it does distract from concentration. And there are various patterns of music that do help, but it's unlikely to be the type that the students are listening to or your kids are listening to. So make sure the room is airy as well. Make sure that there's kind of, lights and natural light if possible. And that can really help. If your child is in school and is boarding, then obviously they will have all this and they'll have their areas that they can go to study. But if you are worried about anything to do with that, then obviously you can reach out to the house parent as well. Okay, I'm going to pass you over to Anna now.
Thanks, Wendy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about brains and what we know from neuroscience about brains and learning. And the reason I want to explain this to you is because I think it backs up all of what Wendy has just said, and it explains why the advice is good advice, and it sort of gives more of a reason for these things that we're suggesting. So I am going to go through 5 different ideas, and they are quite linked together, which you'll see as I explain them. But hopefully they'll give you a better understanding of what sort of brain state your child needs to be in to, as you say, maximize their learning between now and their final examinations. So the first one I'm going to talk about, which you possibly will be able to guess from the graphic, is multitasking. Now, as a female, I would say that I have always been quite proud, feeling that the females are possibly a little bit better at this than males, that when I compare myself to my husband, I can do several things at one time where he can't. Actually, it's not true. We can't multitask. And the reason why we can't actually multitask is because your prefrontal cortex, this bit here, does various different things, personality and things like that, but also that's where your working memory is. That's where the active bit where you're thinking, that's where it all happens. And it can only, the most recent research says, it only really do one thing at a time. It can't do several things. So it can switch quite fast. It takes less than half a second, but it does take a little bit of time to switch. And so in order to work on several different things, you actually have to keep on switching and focus on one and then focus on something else and then go maybe get to the first one, then go to the third. So all this time when I thought I was being an amazing multitasker, actually I wasn't. An awful lot of what I was doing was not using my working memory. It was just using a different part of my memory, a deeper part of my memory, which is sort of like working on autopilot. So if you think about when you very first learn how to drive. So this is me learning how to drive. I couldn't talk, and I couldn't change the radio for sure. And I couldn't really do anything else apart from just learn how to drive because there were far too many things going on with both hands and both feet and my eyes. Whereas now I would say quite proudly that I think I can drive, have a chat with my husband, tell my children off for being too noisy in the back, notice that it's raining and kind of plan what's going to happen for supper. But actually I'm not focusing on all of those things. I'm doing them one at a time. So the reason why I wanted to bring this one up is that the research shows that when a student sits down at a computer, within about 6 minutes, they've opened other tabs and they're doing several things. It is very likely that most people in this presentation have already opened other tabs on their computer and they're doing something, like sending an email, or they're half having a conversation with someone else, or if you're on your phone, you've flicked onto Facebook or you picked up a WhatsApp message. That's totally normal. I know you would have done it. I do it too. But the reason I'm saying this is so that you can talk to your child about the fact that they can't do this. So if they are trying to be on social media and do some learning at the same time, they are not being efficient. So if they're not in the mood or they just can't focus on learning, so stop. Revise the times over for the day, but stop pretending you're learning because it's just wasting your time. It's not very efficient. So the next one is all about, so that was number 1. This is number 2. This one's about the fact that your memory is contextual. So do you remember the graphic that I showed you just now with the different coloured ropes and the knots? You're remembering what I said just now because I just linked back to that. So I put it in context. So if you, another example, if you see a KFC sign, or I'm even talking about a KFC sign, you might suddenly be thinking about chicken. So we do have a contextual memory. At KTJ, we used to have all our exercise books, all were brown when I first arrived. They were all brown, and there were some small pink ones. And students used to turn up to lessons with the wrong book so often, which is really convenient when you haven't done your prep. But students who weren't avoiding having not done their prep would turn up with the wrong books as well. And then what we did was we said, okay, well, we'll just make different coloured books for different subjects. And now, very rarely do students bring the wrong book to lessons because geography is blue and biology is green. And so that's just putting the memory for the subject in context of the colour. So our students can do the same thing. And at home, what you can help them with is the routine that Wendy was talking about, is having a place, a regular time to work, and organising themselves so they can use colour or a certain format for different subjects. That will help them remember. If they lay out their notes in a specific way, if they always structure the notes, the way they always structure their headings, for example, the way they always do their bullet points, if they use diagrams in certain ways, they refer back to the same diagrams that they've created. That's going to help them with their learning. That's going to help them be as efficient as possible. So that was number 2. Now, number 3, Wendy's already talked about this, so I think you can guess what it is. It actually links to number 1, and it's about the multitasking. So yeah, you can't actively listen to music and learn at the same time. You can do one or the other. So your children may say, but it helps me learn. Well, if it cancels out any noise in the apartment and it stops them hearing the TV or a younger child having a meltdown, I don't know, then maybe it is helpful from that point of view. But if you see your child consistently working on their playlist or finding another song on Spotify, then it's not helping. It is just a distraction and it's not useful. That's number 3, that links back to number 1, which is to do with the fact that we can't multitask. So the music one does depend on the situation. Right, the next one is all about recall. And this, we talked a little, the retrieval practice helps this. So when I was doing my GCSEs, I knew loads of phone numbers, lots of them. And now I know mine and my parents. And that is mainly because they haven't changed theirs for 30 years. But I do not know Wendy's phone number, and I do not know my husband's phone number or my daughter's, which actually worries me. Occasionally I think I must learn these. But the reason why I don't know them is because I don't have to punch them into the phone anymore. Putting your memories into a deep memory, so it's not having to just be on that surface and it's less likely to be something you can recall later, is practicing recall. So if you imagine this picture of the box, like the box is the brain, okay? And I know it's got sort of stuff coming out of it. Those are bits of things that you've learned. So if you imagine recall, every time you recall something, so when you learn something, it goes in the box. And then when you recall it, you take it out and you have a look at it. And whilst you have a look at it, it gets a bit shinier and it's a bit clearer. It's a bit more high definition. And then when you put it back in the box, it goes into a slightly more organized area. And you can find it that's much more easily. So if you keep on taking it out and having a look at it, it gets even shinier and even clearer and even easier to find in your brain's filing system. If you don't recall, it just goes down to the bottom of the box, it gets a bit dusty, it's hard to find. So for the parts of the curriculum where your child finds it really hard to remember things, you need to help them with recall. And passive reading does not help with recall. They need to do something active, and this is actually where you can help. So if your child's made flashcards, if they've got lists, if they've got a spider diagram, You can ask them simple questions. They'll probably have to tell you what the questions are because you're probably not an expert in all their subjects. But you can help them just remember stuff. And every time you help them remember it, they're more likely to be able to remember it in the future, but also attach new learning onto it, which is going to help them answer their exam questions. And that is number 4. And this is my number 5. And this is all about sleep. So the learning that we have, or the memories that we create during the day, we process them at nighttime. And we now think that processing happens in real time. And the problem is we don't sleep for the length of time we're awake. So your brain has to be a little bit selective about which bits it processes. And the bits that you forget are the bits that your brain has decided will not process. So it's really important that your children are getting enough sleep. And because of the age they're at, they will want to go to sleep much later than you will. And it's all to do with we were all the same as teenagers. And we want them to get up in the morning. We want them to have a fresh start. They don't. But it's really important that they do have a routine. It's really important they're not distracted late at night, as Wendy said, particularly with social media. If they realize everyone else is on whatever platform it is and talking to each other, they might have fear of missing out. Or talk to them about that. What is more important, that you talk about whatever it is on social media, or you have some really good sleep and you consolidate all the great work that you did today? So sleep is absolutely essential, and that is number 5 on my list. And I'm going to pass on to Wendy now, who's going to talk about mental well-being.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, I just wanted to add on to that as well. I think it's very difficult, particularly if you've got children that are at home and online, because obviously it is a challenging time for all of us, and particularly at their age, I think it's especially challenging. And often, they are talking to their friends late into the night, and that is their kind of lifeline, if you like. So I think it's really important to have those conversations with your child and talk about, when is a good time to go to sleep and the health impacts of that. And obviously they don't want to miss out. But it's important that they get their good portion of sleep. And perhaps it's also a question of negotiating when they go to bed and when they wake up, because teenagers tend to be a bit sleepier in the morning and a bit more active at night. And that is okay as long as they are getting their good sleep. If they are more of a night owl, and they can work more effectively at that time, then that's okay. But you have to make sure that they are not tired, and that it is working for them. So having those conversations, and sometimes if they've done it and you can see that they've got bags down to their chin the next day, and they're tired and they're sleepy and they're grumpy, then that's a good time to get in and have that conversation. But we understand it's tough, but keep plowing on, guys. So with that point, I'd like to talk about mental well-being. Obviously, it is a stressful time. It's a stressful time for you. You want your children to do really well. It's a stressful time for them as well. But do remember, a little bit of stress is okay. A little bit of stress is a good thing. That's what motivates you to focus and motivates you to get up and study and to do all the things that you have that stress to do well, that you want to do well. It's when that stress starts to become a little bit out of control that you need to step in, I think, as a parent. And again, keep talking to your child as much as you can about those issues. But it's a fine line, isn't it, as a parent, to wanting them to work and making sure that they are working and putting that additional pressure on. So as a parent myself, one of the things that I always say to my kids is, as long as you are working hard, I am going to be proud of you. And I think that's a message to get home, no matter what the results, what you want to do well. Whatever the results, if it has come through a lot of hard work and they've done the best they possibly can, then we are still proud of you. And I think that is a really powerful message to give to your children. And you look in the world, there are lots of people out there that are amazingly successful and rich, and have less qualifications than Anna and I, right? And they're very, very rich. So I think keep it in perspective as well. The world is not going to end because examination results are ultimately not what you would expect or stressful, and there are always other pathways, and there are always other things that you can do at that stage, and school can help with that. So keeping it in perspective with the child as well, and making sure kind of reining in your own fears and anxieties that go along. And I'm guilty of this, I'm a mum too. It's really, really important as well, because believe me, even if they don't think, even if they don't look like they're stressed, underneath they are. Okay, so maintaining those kind of social links with their friends, especially if they're at home at the moment, is going to be really important. But perhaps you can, tweak it so that it becomes a productive social contact as well. So if they're online on social media, and there's all sorts of weird and wonderful things they can do these days, they can watch Netflix together and talk at the same time. It's amazing. But anyway, perhaps we can do that as well. But also, maybe they could get together as a study group and have a productive, have some aims and objectives for that study group. We are going to learn the endocrine system or whatever. And then, that's what they go in and learn together, and they help each other. And that can be really powerful and social, and help to reduce their stress as well, because they are learning from one another as well. And also getting each other to teach something. If you can teach it, the way that it wires in the brain is that they will definitely remember it as well. So saying to me, oh, can you teach me about the First World War, or what is this policy, or what does microeconomics mean? And kids love that, because if they think you're stupid and they can tell you something, then that's a really powerful motivator there. And they're also teaching you something, and therefore they're helping their own equal as well. So that's something that you can do, and it helps with the bonding as well during this difficult time. So obviously at school, we have school counsellors, we have learning support, we have house staff, and obviously their teachers that you can get in touch with, or you can encourage your child to get in touch with as well. Stressful, believe it or not, those squidgy things are really good for kids at this time of year. High energy drinks, I just wanted to say something like that. Please avoid them if you can, and please, do not let them in your house if you can. Often children say, so I need them because they help me to stay awake, they help me to concentrate, but actually they have a quick high and a very long down, and the very long down affects mental cognition and memory. And I'll just share a very quick story, because I found it quite interesting. In the previous school, I was working with kids on the IB, and we were doing things to do with sugar and drinks. And one of my students had disclosed that he drank those Red Bulls, and he had 2 or 3 a day. And I was like, I have 2 or 3 a day. Number one, that's like crazy. And number two, why are you tired all the time? and I'm explaining to him that actually it was the energy drinks that was contributing to his tiredness. And he didn't believe me, but we made it into a project. And funnily enough, a few weeks later, there was a different boy in my class, and he was all bouncy and energetic. And I was like, whoa, what's happened to you? And he went, I've given up the energy drinks. He was a different boy. His energy levels, ironically, were much higher, minus the energy drinks. So I would say, please avoid the energy drinks. Make sure that, again, the same kind of caffeine and coffee and those kind of drinks as well. Try to make sure that your child is having a healthy diet. I know to gravitate towards noodles is always strong in children, but try to make sure that they're having a healthy diet, that they're having fresh fruit and exercise as well. Make sure that when they're having their breaks in between their timetable revision, that they're actually getting up, moving around. That's the time to put music on loud and dance around the room like a loon, or whatever it is that they enjoy doing. That's the time to do it. And make sure that they are having some exercise, whether that's just stretching or something that they're finding on YouTube or through the school PE videos or anything like that, or whether it's actually physically walking outside. That's really important as well for well-being, and will help to de-stress them. Studying all the time is not going to be effective, they do need to take those breaks, as we've said before. And as I said, focusing on the positive and having those conversations with the child each week, maybe, look how much you've done this week. You've nailed all of these areas and they've gone from, from orange to green or whatever. You say, oh, that's amazing. And having those small wins and recognizing those small wins. And just, if you're walking past the living room and you see they're working really hard, go, good job, Johnny, you're working really hard. Well, they might sneer at you in that teenage way that they do, but underneath it will, I'm sure it will go in and make things better. Okay. And obviously, as I said, there are counsellors that can help. Your kids can talk to the counsellors and learning support in a confidential way. Sometimes just talking to that person outside the family helps a lot. So don't be alone with it as well. Okay, on to Anna.
So this is the last bit of information that we'll be passing on today, and then we'll move on to questions. The final IGCSE examinations, as you know, they're run by the exam boards, and we use two for our IGCSEs. We use Cambridge and we use Pearson. And we're in close contact with them. And at the moment, they both reiterated that as long as it's safe to do so, the examinations will be running. So we fully expect the examinations to run in May and June. If anything changes, we will let you know. And I will be in touch via email through ISAMS. But that is what's happening, and students will receive, we're currently making we're booking students in for the exams, and they'll receive a list of the examinations that they're entered for and their timetables soon. So that is everything I have to say. Wendy, do you have anything else to add?
No, that's it.
Great. So I hope that what we've said has been useful to you. And we now are very happy to answer any questions that you might have. We've got about 5 minutes. So please do put questions in the chat if you have any. This is like being on Zoom lessons when you answer.
Yes, it is.
So we're being asked if these tips are being shared with the students who are boarding. Wendy, do you want to take that one?
If what? Sorry, I didn't hear that.
If the tips that we've explained today, are they being shared with our students?
Yes, they are. So on Monday, we have a session in mentoring, so an hour and 20 minutes. And basically, it's a student-friendly version of what we've said. And there is a video from me, sort of saying similar things to what we said today, followed by some activities. And they will be given a revision resource that will basically go through all the different types of revision that they can try. So rather than, sometimes, students don't understand the different ways that they can revise and activate that active recall. So there's lots of different things that they can try, and they will be able to talk about that with their mentors. In addition, I'd just like to point out as well that every Form 5 student will be having a meeting with Mr. Taylor, who is our higher education careers counsellor. They're happening at the moment. And there are a few children that are at home that seem to have forgotten that they've got these meetings. So perhaps an area that you can help with is to just remind your students that, to check their emails and to check the appointment times that Mr. Taylor has sent out. And part of these interviews will be to talk about their future pathways and what they want to do in the future and to give advice about that. But it will also be looking at it from an academic and progress point of view as well. So we will be looking at their trial results and their forecast grades and talking to them about how they can move forward to where they want to be as well. So they'll be getting advice not only from their mentors, but from Mr. Taylor and from their teachers as well as us. So they've got it covered quite a few times.
Yeah. I'm looking at questions about the exam timetables, which, Wendy, I'll take these questions.
Thank you.
So the exams will, The exam timetable is different for every student because it depends entirely on the combination of subjects that they take.
Yeah.
So our exams officer is making the entries right now. And once she's confirmed the entries, she'll be able to make the timetable for the students. But the exams will start in May. So generally what happens next term is the students come, it depends a little bit on where Easter falls each year. I think it's relatively early this year. The students come back for 2 or 3 weeks usually, and then the exams start. And when the exams start, we move to what's called study leave. So during study leave, the students don't have lessons anymore. They can have access to their teachers to ask questions. But because every student has a different exam timetable, they're free to carry out independent study and then attend their exams.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want to add to that, Wendy?
No, not at all. That's what I was going to say as well.
The next question I can see is about the marking scheme seemed low, whether the trial exam papers were difficult. When it comes to examinations, every single subject has different grade boundaries. For example, maths always has high grade boundaries. And that's mainly because as a subject, maths has a very definitive answer. Whereas Wendy is an English teacher, and English teachers and examiners spend hours arguing about answers to the questions. And so there isn't just one answer. And consequently, subjects like history and English, their grade boundaries are much, much lower. Now, when the exam boards do the marking, they change the numbers. They sort of add on numbers. And for English and history, they add on lots of numbers. And for maths, they add on probably no numbers. And you get what's called UMS scores. And with these UMS scores, 90% is an A star and 80% is an A. But when it comes, that's quite a complicated process. And you can only do it if you have thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces of data, which we don't have in a school because we only have our own cohort. So this is quite an involved answer to your question. Don't worry about the boundaries for the grade boundaries for the different subjects. They have been based on the previous raw grade boundaries for that subject in the last 2 or 3 years, plus the head of department's judgment about whether this particular exam paper was a bit easier or a bit harder. And they use lots of information, their own experience to work that out. So yes, some of the trial exams have been quite hard and some will be easy, but that's normal. Every year they are, and every year the final examinations, some are easier, some are harder, which is why the exam boards shift the grade boundaries every year depending on the difficulty of the paper. And you can only really judge the difficulty of the paper once a whole load of students have sat the paper and you can see how they did. So I hope that makes sense. Yeah. Just looking to see if we have any more questions. If you want to ask a question, now is your moment. Otherwise, we will finish this webinar.
Okay, just to say as well that the pack that the students will be getting on Monday, I have actually shared in the filed section in the webinar. So you will be able to download that at the end so that you can see what techniques they've been given to practice and memorize their content, so that you can have a look at it as well and say, hey kids, have you tried this technique or whatever? So you can have a look at that as well. And in terms of what one's parents said about are the housemasters and mistresses practicing these tips, and all housemasters and mistresses are teachers as well. So you know they have their own expertise and will be familiar with all the advice to help students to revise and make progress as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for all the messages of thanks that we're getting. We both hope that that was useful for you. If you have any particular questions, please do email either Wendy or myself, and we will do our best to answer them. And rest assured that we are going to continue to do everything possible to make sure that your children do the very, very best in their examinations.
Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you. Just a little plug before you go.
Okay.
Just to let you know, and it will be advertised to you as well in February, in line with the support that we're putting in place for Form 5 students to move on to transition to pathways after Form 5, 6 and so on. There are a couple of webinars that look at the different pathways after 5, also the 6th form in KTJ. So do sign up for those to get information. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.